That's always kind of freaky, isn't it, when a bird or an animal, I guess most animals don't say anything, do they?
Of course, Johnny Carson's true impact on pop culture came through hosting The Tonight Show for nearly 3 decades. Jim Axelrod looks back on this fabled entertainer's influential life.
For over 30 years, Johnny Carson was the face of late-night television. Every night, people across America would sit in their living rooms, turn on their TVs, and laugh along with Johnny's jokes, his funny expressions, and his quick comebacks. With his warm smile, perfect timing, and easygoing style, he made hosting The Tonight Show look simple. But what many people didn't see was the pressure behind the scenes and the moments that made even Johnny Carson feel uncomfortable, or worse, angry. Yes, even the king of late night had his bad days. There were times on the show when things went completely off track. Some guests said weird things. Others acted out of control. Sometimes, wild animals were brought on stage, and they didn't behave. And once in a while, a guest crossed the line so badly that Johnny's smile started to fade. These moments weren't just awkward, they were the ones Johnny hated the most. Imagine sitting at your desk, live on TV, in front of millions, and something embarrassing or unexpected happens. You can't just walk away, you have to keep smiling. That's what Johnny did. He stayed calm on the outside, but deep down, he was fuming. The show must go on, right? In this video, we're going to take a closer look at 27 moments Johnny Carson hated during his time on The Tonight Show. From cringy guest interviews to strange animal attacks, from tense arguments to shocking surprises, these moments pushed Johnny's patience to the edge. So grab your popcorn and get ready. We're pulling back the curtain to show you the real side of late-night TV, the side where even the coolest host in television history couldn't hide his frustration. Because when things didn't go as planned, Johnny Carson's smile didn't always tell the whole story. The guest who refused to stop talking. One of the biggest nightmares for any talk show host is dealing with a guest who doesn't know when to stop talking. These shows are meant to be smooth, funny, and balanced, a nice back-and-forth conversation. But sometimes, things don't go as planned. And for Johnny Carson, the king of late-night television, one guest took things way too far. Johnny always liked guests who were funny, sharp, and respectful. He enjoyed people who knew how to tell a story, but also knew how to let others talk. The Tonight Show wasn't just about the guest. It was about the flow of the conversation. But during one particular episode, that smooth rhythm completely disappeared. Why? Because the guest wouldn't let Johnny get a word in. From the moment this guest sat down, it was clear something was off. Johnny greeted him with his usual warm smile and opened with a light question.
But Red is my middle name.
Yeah.
I was
Vincennes, Indiana, right?
Yeah. My home.
What's the very first show you ever played that you remember, being on a stage in front of an audience?
And it didn't stop there. As Johnny tried to guide the conversation, the guest just kept talking louder, faster, and with no pause. Every time Johnny tried to ask something or even react, the guest would interrupt. Even when Johnny cracked a joke, something he was famous for, the guest would cut him off or laugh too early, ruining the timing completely. It was awkward to watch. It was as if Johnny had become invisible on his show. At first, Johnny stayed calm. He was a professional. He smiled, nodded, and waited for his turn to speak. But as the segment dragged on, it became harder to hide his frustration. His smile started to fade, his laughs sounded forced, and he kept adjusting in his seat like he couldn't wait for it to end. His body started showing what his face was trying to hide, his arms folded, his fingers tapping on the desk, and his eyes glancing toward the crew, almost begging for a way out. Normally, Johnny was very good at turning any awkward situation into something funny. He could joke his way through almost anything. But this time, there wasn't much he could do. The guest was completely taking over. It wasn't just rude, it was disrespectful. The audience could feel it too. The usual cheerful vibe of the show had vanished. People watching at home probably shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing how wrong the energy felt. The worst part? Johnny couldn't even steer the conversation back. It was like the guest was hosting his show, and Johnny was just a prop sitting there with a tight smile. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the show went to a commercial break. The cameras stopped rolling, and the audience clapped politely, though not as loudly as usual. Behind the scenes, things were tense. According to some of the crew who were there that night, Johnny didn't say a single word during the break. He simply stood up, shook his head slowly, and walked off the stage, clearly annoyed. That short walk backstage probably felt like a long sigh of relief for Johnny. It's not often that he lets his irritation show, but this time, his patience had been tested to the limit. In private, he reportedly said later, "That was one of the toughest interviews I've ever had." Coming from someone who had interviewed thousands of people, that meant a lot. This moment became one of those rare times when the polished, unshakable Johnny Carson looked visibly uncomfortable. And not because of a bad joke or a strange moment, but because someone simply didn't respect the art of conversation. Looking back, fans and show experts often say this interview was a clear example of what not to do on a talk show. It showed how important balance is between a host and a guest. No matter how famous or interesting someone is, a good guest knows when to talk and when to listen. Sadly, this guest didn't get that memo, and for Johnny, who spent his whole career making others shine, it was a moment where he had to sit through something he truly hated being ignored on his stage. The animal that got too wild. Johnny Carson was known for many things: his smooth voice, quick wit, and that charming smile he flashed at the audience each night. But one part of the show that fans always looked forward to was the animal segments. They were wild, unpredictable, and usually filled with laughs. Johnny enjoyed them too. They added a fun twist to the usual celebrity interviews. Most of the time, it was all good fun. But one night, things got way out of hand, and what was supposed to be a lighthearted moment turned into something Johnny hated. That night started like any other Tonight Show episode. The set was buzzing with energy. The audience was excited, and Johnny was in a great mood. A well-known zookeeper had been invited to show off some interesting animals. Everyone expected something cute or amusing, maybe a bird that could talk or a baby tiger that would cuddle up next to Johnny. But what came out instead was a large chimpanzee that looked calm at first, but only at first. As the handler walked the chimp onto the stage, the audience clapped and laughed. The chimp seemed relaxed, just looking around curiously. Johnny, always the showman, leaned forward and said something funny to get a laugh from the crowd. It worked. People chuckled, and the moment seemed picture perfect. But that peace didn't last. Suddenly, with no warning, the chimp leaped onto Johnny's desk. The crowd gasped in surprise. Papers flew into the air. A glass of water spilled all over Johnny's desk, soaking his notes. Before Johnny could react, the chimp reached out and grabbed a fistful of his hair. At first, Johnny tried to play it cool. He laughed nervously and joked, "Well, I guess he's the host now," trying to keep things light for the audience. But behind that forced laugh, Johnny was anything but amused. He sat frozen as the chimp pulled at his hair, then yanked his tie like it was a toy. The animal began screeching loudly, a sharp, wild sound that made everyone in the room uneasy. People in the audience didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Johnny's eyes darted toward the crew. This wasn't funny anymore. It was genuinely frightening. The zookeeper rushed to the desk, trying to calm the chimp down, whispering commands and holding out treats. Security staff appeared out of nowhere, slowly stepping onto the stage, ready to step in if things got worse. Johnny sat stiff as a board, his hands on his lap, doing his best not to move or make sudden gestures that could scare the animal even more. After a tense few moments, which felt like hours to Johnny, the chimp finally let go of his tie and backed away. The zookeeper managed to lead it off the stage, still chattering and yanking at its leash. The crowd clapped nervously, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Johnny took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and tried to regain control of the show. He made a quick joke, something like, "That's the last time I share my hair products." It got a few laughs, but even the audience could tell he was shaken. His usual sparkle was dimmed for the rest of the show. The fun was gone. When the cameras finally turned off and the lights dimmed, Johnny's smile vanished. People close to him said he turned to his crew and, in a serious tone, said, "No more chimps. Ever." It wasn't just an offhand comment, it was a rule from that day forward. That experience stayed with him. Though he had handled it like a pro on camera, inside, he had felt something close to fear. He later admitted privately that he had been scared the chimp might bite or attack. Wild animals, even trained ones, are never truly predictable. And for someone like Johnny, who liked to be in control of the show, losing control in that way was terrifying. This wasn't just a silly moment on live TV. For Johnny Carson, it became one of the most uncomfortable and hated segments he ever had to go through. Even years later, whenever animal handlers were booked for the show, he would always ask, "Is it going to jump on me?" Half joking, but half serious. It was a moment that reminded everyone watching that live television is anything but safe, and even the most polished host in the world can find himself in a very wild situation. A joke that went too far. Johnny Carson was widely considered the master of comedy. His quick wit, clever timing, and ability to turn any situation into a laugh made him the undisputed king of late-night television. Week after week, Johnny brought the best comedians, actors, and musicians onto The Tonight Show. And no matter what the topic was, he could always find a way to make it funny. His legendary charm and ability to make light of any awkward moment were what made him beloved by millions of viewers. But even Johnny, with his unmatched expertise, wasn't always prepared for when things got out of hand. One night, Johnny welcomed a famous comedian onto the show, a man known for his edgy humor and sharp tongue. At first, it seemed like another fun interview. The two of them joked around, and the audience laughed at the usual playful banter. But as the segment went on, the comedian began to push the limits of good taste. What started as lighthearted jokes began to veer into more personal territory, and that's when things started to go south. At first, Johnny played along, laughing and throwing in a few jabs of his own. It was all part of the game. Comedy is often about pushing boundaries, and Johnny was no stranger to poking fun at himself. But this time, the guest took it a step too far. As the jokes grew more pointed, the tone shifted. The comedian started making remarks about Johnny's marriage, something that Johnny had always kept very private. The audience could sense the change, too. What had been a light and fun moment now felt uncomfortable. Then, the comedian crossed a line. He commented on Johnny's divorce, a subject that was deeply personal for him and something he hadn't discussed publicly. The room immediately fell silent. The laughter that had filled the air moments before disappeared. It was as if the audience realized the joke wasn't funny anymore. It was hurtful. Johnny paused for a second. He looked at the comedian, his smile suddenly tightening. It wasn't the usual relaxed grin. It was the kind of smile that happens when someone's trying to hide how uncomfortable they feel. The crowd could feel the shift. Johnny had always been so good at keeping his composure, but this was different. For a split second, you could see a flash of hurt in his eyes. His personal life was something he worked hard to keep out of the spotlight, and here was a guest making a joke that went too far, one that pierced through the carefully built walls of his privacy. Trying to recover, Johnny quickly shifted gears, changing the subject and moving the conversation forward. He didn't want the moment to linger any longer than necessary. But no matter how smoothly he tried to move on, the damage had already been done. The energy in the room was different. The audience's mood had shifted, and it was clear that even though Johnny had expertly redirected the conversation, he wasn't truly okay. Johnny was known for his ability to recover from awkward moments, whether it was a bad joke, a technical difficulty, or an unplanned surprise. But this was a different kind of moment. It wasn't just a slip-up or a misstep in comedy. This was an attack on something personal, something Johnny had worked hard to keep private. For a man who had spent his career entertaining millions while keeping his own life out of the public eye, this joke was a reminder that even comedians have their limits. The uncomfortable moment stayed with Johnny long after the show was over. Behind the scenes, he didn't show any signs of anger or frustration, but the experience left a mark. Johnny had always believed in the power of laughter. It was his job, his life, and his passion. But that night, he learned that not all laughs are harmless. Sometimes, comedy crosses a line, and the joke that was meant to entertain ends up hurting the person at the center of it. And for Johnny Carson, that was one of the hardest lessons to learn. Later, when reflecting on the incident, Johnny acknowledged that comedy had its boundaries. While he understood the importance of humor and self-deprecation, he also realized that there were things people didn't have the right to joke about. For him, personal life was off limits, and anyone who didn't respect that was crossing a boundary he wasn't willing to forgive. It was a moment that stood as a reminder to both Johnny and the millions of viewers watching that even the funniest people can have moments of vulnerability. Johnny wasn't just the man behind the desk, telling jokes. He was human too, and some things just weren't funny. The guest who didn't want to be there. Not every celebrity is thrilled to do talk shows. Some of them do it because they have a movie, album, or book to promote. Others, however, genuinely don't enjoy the spotlight and find themselves sitting on those late-night couches with a sense of dread. But in the world of talk shows, a host's job is to keep things fun, engaging, and lively. And that's where Johnny Carson, the king of late-night television, truly excelled. He had an incredible ability to make guests feel comfortable and at ease, no matter how nervous they might be. However, there was one guest who made it clear that they didn't want to be on The Tonight Show. From the very moment the guest walked onto the set, it was clear something was wrong. The energy in the room was completely off. Johnny, with his famous charm and ability to make anyone feel welcome, could tell immediately that this guest was not happy to be there. While most people would come out with a smile, ready to shake hands and engage with Johnny and the audience, this guest seemed to want to disappear into the shadows. They barely acknowledged the applause from the crowd, which was odd for someone of their status. Instead of walking out with a big smile or a wave, they seemed almost reluctant to be there at all. As Johnny greeted them, they gave a cold, one-word answer and quickly took a seat. It was almost as though they were somewhere else entirely, physically present, but mentally checked out. There was no excitement, no energy, just a cold presence that hung in the air like an awkward cloud. Johnny, ever the professional, tried to shake things up. He asked light-hearted questions about the guest's latest project, cracked a few jokes to lighten the mood, and even tried to compliment them in hopes of getting a smile or some reaction. Johnny's charm was well known, and his quick wit had made him a hit with nearly every guest who sat across from him. But this time, it wasn't working. No matter what Johnny tried, the guest remained distant and disengaged. It wasn't that the guest was shy, it was more like they didn't want to be there at all. Every time Johnny asked a question, the guest gave a brief response, as if they were only there to fulfill an obligation. Eye contact was avoided, and there was no effort to engage with the audience or with Johnny. The silence between them grew louder with every passing second. Johnny's usually smooth, confident demeanor began to crack, and the uncomfortable tension between the two grew palpable. You could see it on Johnny's face. He was genuinely struggling to connect with this guest, something that didn't happen often. As the interview went on, the audience began to feel the tension too. It was becoming painful to watch. The usual flow of conversation had completely stopped. The laughter from Johnny's jokes was missing, and the usual playful back and forth was nowhere to be found. People watching at home, could tell something was off. Some even later said it felt like they were watching a silent fight play out on live TV. Johnny, the host who was usually in complete control, had found himself in an awkward standstill with a guest who didn't want to play the game. At one point, Johnny tried to lighten the mood by telling a funny story or making a quick comment to keep things flowing. The audience was waiting for that familiar laugh, but this time, it never came. The guest gave a dry response, barely acknowledging Johnny's attempt at humor. The awkwardness only deepened. And you could see Johnny, the master of late-night interviews, searching for some kind of escape from this uncomfortable moment. But there was no way out. The guest simply wasn't interested. When the segment finally ended and the camera cut to commercial, there was an undeniable sense of relief. The crew, who worked with Johnny behind the scenes, later reported that Johnny didn't say a word after the interview. He didn't yell or complain, but his silence spoke volumes. It was clear that he was frustrated and disappointed. Johnny had always prided himself on making his guests feel at home, but this time, there was no magic, no connection. After the show, reports circulated that Johnny was heard saying, "If you don't want to be here, don't come." That statement reflected just how deeply the encounter had bothered him. Johnny believed in giving every guest a chance to shine, but he also valued authenticity. He knew that when someone didn't want to be there, it made everything uncomfortable. It wasn't just the usual boring interview, this was one of the most painful, awkward moments of his career. That episode left a lasting impact on Johnny. It made him rethink how guests were chosen for the show. If a guest wasn't excited about being on the show, it would show, and it would make the entire experience uncomfortable for everyone. The audience, the crew, and even Johnny could feel it. From that point on, Johnny was more selective in making sure that guests came on to The Tonight Show with the energy and enthusiasm that matched the spirit of the show. It was a reminder that, no matter how successful a talk show host might be, not every moment is going to be a perfect one. Sometimes, a guest's mood can completely shift the energy of an interview. And in the case of the guest who didn't want to be there, Johnny Carson learned that not every guest could be made to feel comfortable, no matter how hard he tried. The prank that backfired. Johnny Carson was known for his quick wit, infectious smile, and ability to handle just about anything that came his way, whether it was a funny joke, a surprise guest, or even a mishap live on television. He was a pro at handling the unpredictable nature of live TV. But there was one moment that proved even Johnny wasn't immune to a prank gone wrong. Johnny loved surprises, but only when he was in on the joke. He prided himself on being a good sport, always laughing along with his guests and having fun with the audience. However, one guest thought it would be a good idea to play a prank on Johnny during a live segment, and it backfired in the most chaotic way possible. The guest brought out what appeared to be a fake snake. Johnny, with his usual charm and confidence, believed it was just another harmless prop meant to amuse the audience. As the guest handed it to him, Johnny made a casual joke, picked it up, and went along with it, fully expecting it to be a rubber snake. But in a shocking twist, the snake wasn't fake at all. It was very much alive, and it didn't appreciate being handled by a stranger. Suddenly, the snake wiggled, its body slithering out of Johnny's grasp. Startled, Johnny screamed in shock. The audience gasped as Johnny fumbled, dropping the snake in a panic. The chaos that followed was almost surreal. Crew members rushed onto the stage, trying to manage the situation. The audience was thrown into a frenzy, unsure of what was happening. Johnny, now visibly shaken, stood frozen for a moment before trying to recover his composure. But his face was pale, and his calm demeanor had completely vanished. Johnny tried to laugh it off, as he often did in moments of tension, but it was clear from his body language that this was not funny to him at all. The situation had gone from a light-hearted moment to a near disaster in seconds. Johnny, ever the professional, quickly regained his composure, but anyone watching could tell that he was angry, a feeling he rarely showed on camera. After the show, Johnny wasn't shy about how he felt. He immediately told the producers, We never prank like that again. Ever. This moment, though it had brought some laughter, was one that Johnny deeply regretted. The prank had gone too far, making the moment feel less like comedy and more like an uncomfortable risk. For Johnny, this experience was a clear reminder of the fine line between humor and danger, and why sometimes pranks are better left untried. Though it may have gotten laughs from the audience, it was one of the moments that Johnny truly hated and wished had never happened on his show. For years, Johnny Carson was the smooth, smiling face of late-night television. He brought happiness into homes every night. But behind that famous desk sat a real man, a man who, like anyone else, had limits. These 27 moments weren't just awkward or strange. They were real, raw, and uncomfortable. They showed that even the best in the business get thrown off sometimes. Johnny handled it all with grace. He didn't walk off, he didn't yell, he stayed professional. But those who knew him, and even those watching closely at home, could see the cracks when things went too far. The smile didn't always reach his eyes. The jokes didn't always land. And sometimes you could just tell he was done. What makes this list special isn't just the drama. It's the fact that these moments remind us that Johnny Carson was human. He wasn't just a talk show host. He was someone who had feelings, limits, and boundaries. So, the next time you watch an old clip of The Tonight Show, look closely. Behind the jokes and laughter, you might spot one of those famous moments. A small flinch, a tight smile, a glance off to the side. A moment where Johnny Carson, the king of late night, was silently wishing the segment would end. These 27 moments may have made him cringe, but they also made him real. And maybe that's why we still remember him so fondly. Behind the curtain, behind the charm and the laughter, Johnny Carson was just like the rest of us, trying to smile through the chaos.